My name is Michelle Gross, and I'm a partner in Mayor Brown's Northern California office, a member of the Technology Transactions, IP Transactions, and Cybersecurity and Data Privacy Practices. For us, the hottest growth areas relate to the digital transformation made possible by automation, AI, and robotics. So we're thrilled to have such a great panel today to discuss these hot topics. Joining me today as panelists are Aaron Abrams, General Counsel of Via Transportation, a technology startup in the on-demand shared ride space. Aaron's portfolio covers corporate transactions, venture-backed financing, insurance, cybersecurity and data privacy, technology licensing, commercial agreements, transportation, regulatory and licensing issues, employee and independent contractor matters, and litigation, quite a bit. Aaron also manages Via's patent portfolio and oversees risk, insurance, and compliance functions at Via. We also have Louise Huntlin, Executive Vice President, Chief Business Affairs and Legal Officer at PayPal. Louise is responsible for PayPal's global people, legal, communications, intellectual property, government relations, and social innovations functions, where she drives focus on PayPal's financial, regulatory, and legal requirements across all global markets and promotes PayPal's reputation globally through corporate affairs initiatives. Louise is also responsible for PayPal's people function, which leads and drives leadership excellence, culture, training, workforce planning, employee relations, compensation benefits, as well as diversity and inclusion initiatives. And we have Beth Stevens, Head of Legal and Corporate Secretary at Opendoor, a rapidly growing real estate technology company. Beth is responsible for the company's legal, real estate, brokerage, insurance, and compliance teams within the organization. Prior to joining Opendoor, Beth served as the General Counsel of Inc., a consumer lending company. Now, before we begin, we'd like to mention a few housekeeping announcements. Please note, when accessing Mayor Brown programs via our WebEx platform, we generally suggest avoiding software such as Citrix to decrease disruption or quality loss. Today's webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions that are unanswered during the presentation, we invite you to submit them at any time using the Q&A function on the right side of the screen. We'll do our best to address your questions live or after the program if we don't have time. With that said, let's get started. We're going to start with a few polling questions to give everyone a sense of our audience's interests and points of view. So we'll start with a question. You'll have a little under a minute to answer it, and we'll run through a few of those. Let's start with the first. So the first question is, what is driving innovation in corporate strategy? You have a few options: customer demand, technology, value propositions, new business models. A few more seconds to answer that. Well, it's a nice balance, actually. We have almost the same percentages. Customer demand, technology, and new business models seem to be the dominant answers there. So we'll move on to our second question. Is your organization leveraging artificial intelligence, AI? We have a few options. Yes, but just getting started. But we're considering it and not at this time. So yes, but just getting started seems to have the highest number of responses. Close second, but yes, we have been and will continue to. So it seems like it has definitely made its way into most organizations. Move on to the third question. What is your organization's primary concerns in digital transactions? Data privacy and security, scalability, go-to-market timing, or cost? As a data privacy lawyer, I hope A is a popular answer. Winner, winner. Data privacy and security was 65%. So I know we'll be touching on that topic in our discussion today. And the last question is, what is the technology innovation that you see being most impactful to your business over the next 10 years? So your options are blockchain, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, or quantum computing. Artificial intelligence was 56%, responses, followed by IoT, 28%. So that should hopefully give you all a little bit of a sense of what people were thinking about. And we'll talk about one of the first questions, what's driving innovation in corporate strategy? I wanted to dig into, and we talked about customer demand, technology, value propositions, new business models. So Beth, I'll start with you. I mean, how would you frame what is driving innovation at Open Door?
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know where Open Door is, we are empowering people with the freedom to move. So we break apart an individual seller's reliance on finding a qualified buyer to purchase their house by making a competitive offer to that seller. And then we turn and sell the house that we own to buyers with all-day open houses. So we're not flippers. There's no HGTV. We're not adding a bedroom. We're turning those houses in less than 10 days to put them back on the market. And so what we deliver to our customers is a certain sense of certainty, right? Whether they're selling or buying, about what offer they're going to get and what their net proceeds are going to be, and certainty that it will close, because they don't have to wait for our mortgage to go through and to get approved. We've got the cash to buy the house. So with that in mind, when you think about what's driving us, a lot of the technology innovations are being driven by COVID, frankly. They were things we already had planned, but they are being accelerated because of need. One of the additional things that our customers need right now is safety. And they need to be able to sell their house without interacting with a human that could potentially bring, the pandemic to their doorstep. So we've enabled virtual assessments and other technology-driven items so that there's no human-to-human contact. The same thing for our buyers. We have empty, vacant houses that people can look at. And so setting up tours for them, setting up virtual tours or in-person tours through technology has accelerated in a way that it didn't historically in traditional real estate. I'm sure many people on this call have done the traipsing through people's houses at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday while they were trying to buy a house. And a lot of our technology innovations over the last, let's say 6 months have been driven by that fear of having a stranger in your house. So that's really exciting. And I think we'll see a lot more technology, drones to look at roofs, to inspect them, and a number of, e-notary and other sorts of technology, provided state regs can catch up to make that process really seamless and online and as close to quote unquote one click as you can get to in the real estate industry.
That makes a lot of sense. Erin, what do you think? What would you say is driving innovation at VIA?
Sure, thanks for having me. So for those of you who are not familiar with VIA, we are a platform for on-demand mobility technology. So we are the leader in the transit space, licensing our technology to private and public transit operators around the world. And for us, all of these factors play a role, but especially in the post-COVID era, we've had to be very responsive to the needs of our customers and think about innovating new products that really make sense for them. So whereas before, we were mostly focused on ride sharing in the consumer space, we had, for several years prior to COVID, been moving into the B2B SaaS space, licensing our technology to on-demand private and public sector operators, and COVID really accelerated that for us. So we had to innovate new products at light speed. So to think about, ways to help hospitals get their doctors and nurses to shifts around the clock to staff the hospital, and help corporate clients get their essential workers, supply chain workers to factories and keep the supply chain running. Also, we developed new products in the educational, the ed tech space to help foster kids get to schools in New York City in the hybrid model where buses were not running. And then also thinking about ways to meet emerging needs, like, for example, refugee families in DC, or children who formerly depended on schools for school lunches. We innovated in the logistics space to bring goods and food and meals to these families on demand. So we had to think about all these new products, think about the regulatory landscape that permitted these products, and also think about how to keep all the end users safe and mitigate the risks around COVID at the same time. We also thought about new ways that we could use our data to help with contact tracing, and how booking seats in vehicles with a limited capacity could help to enforce social distancing. So all of these things were, kind of driving innovation and technology in the last few months.
Right, it sounds like both Open Door and VIA definitely advancing your innovative programs on account of Open Door. Louise, are you seeing some similar reactions at PayPal, or are there other drivers there?
I think that both. I think, hopefully everyone knows who PayPal is, and if you don't know PayPal, you probably know Venmo, because we own them as well. I think, when we split from eBay in 2015, one of the things that we, set out to do was sort of establish a mission. And that mission was to democratize financial services. And that in itself, very different innovation for how and who gets access to the financial services environment globally. And I think that was, part of what's driven our innovation. So, we wanted to find much more affordable ways for everyone to have access to managing and moving their money, whether that was, transmitting your money internationally, whether it's, moving it within a country. And so I think, for the last 5 years, we've been on a pretty high growth, high velocity experiences. We've sort of established what we want to be and who we want to be in the world. What I think COVID has done is created an accelerant for the digital transformation. And I think for most companies who probably had a plan on some level for digital transformation, COVID's accelerated that. And I would say that that's obviously been a real sort of tailwind for PayPal, because we are digital financial services, at the very essence of who we are. And what it's done is allowed us to really start to think about how we can accelerate much more, in the offline environment, how you use QR codes, how do you avoid, contacted payments and move to contactless because of your concerns around, catching a virus in an in-store environment. And so those things have definitely this year been accelerated, but at the same time, the world has evolved to being much more digital in this period. And we've certainly, been ready to support the needs there, I think, as they've emerged.
That sounds right. I mean, that I knew that the world had evolved quite quickly during this COVID time when my kindergartner was showing me how to use a QR code. So it's here. I know, Beth, you talked about a lot of or you mentioned the regulatory challenges. How do you handle the regulatory challenges and other roadblocks that come along the way when it comes to implementing innovation, especially in your space?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I would describe what Open Door does as it's not a square peg in a round hole, it's an oval peg in a round hole. So we're operating under a state-by-state regulatory scheme, whether you're talking about real estate, our mortgage business, which we have a mortgage origination business, or our title and escrow services, which are essentially insurance and payments in the real estate space. So from that perspective, we partner a lot with Mayor Brown actually on this front, and we work to navigate it so that it's still seamless to the customer, but accounts for those state-by-state niceties. So, different states have allowed electronic notary, for example, right now, but every state has their own requirements. So what we do in Arizona may not be what we do in Texas. And we have to work feverishly behind the scenes to make those operations smooth and seamless to the customer. So if a customer is buying a house or selling their house in Arizona and moving to Texas, they don't really experience a difference if they're working with Open Door. And those are our goals. It's not hard. It just takes intent, understanding, and a lot of logistical planning.
Right. Yeah, quite a bit of it with the state by state issues that you all deal with. I'm not sure how you manage it all. Erin, how is VIA handling the various roadblocks that come along the way in terms of innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest roadblock is just how quickly we can develop, test, and launch new products. So that's one of the reasons that I'm really focused on making sure our legal team can leverage technology to speed up the contracting process and provide data and insights to track our commercial contracts through the signing and renewal pipeline, and really work collaboratively with the sales and BD team on that process. But also, regulatory frameworks that don't keep pace with the speed of innovation can certainly pose a challenge. So For us at VIA, we really believe in working hand in hand with our regulators and our public sector customers as partners in innovation. So sometimes this requires some creative thinking. It requires that we build strong relationships with our regulators, that we do community engagement and sometimes policy advocacy to enable new products to come to market in a safe and compliant way, and make sure our regulators feel comfortable that before we drive a single mile in their city, that we're offering a product that benefits their citizens. So for us, we view our relationships with public sector partners as an opportunity to innovate and not as a roadblock to smash through or drive around. There's lots of smart and dedicated public servants who work in city planning today, and they're often in the best position to know the transportation needs that their communities have. So we really help to make that a reality for them with sophisticated modeling and route planning tools. And that also provides us a huge opportunity to help to expand services in underserved communities, like in transit deserts and in low-income and minority communities that might not have had access to on-demand mobility. And we're very much focused on thinking about transportation equity in those ways as an opportunity.
That's great. I really loved hearing about all that you all are doing in that regard. It's such important work. So yeah, thanks for that. Louise, how do you think about the various roadblocks that come along the way when it comes to implementing innovation? How do you all think about taking those on?
Well, I mean, I think PayPal is a roadblock in innovation because of what we came out of, which was the financial services, where everybody said it couldn't be innovated, right? And if you go back to its origins, there was sort of a ghast and a horror that that a fintech could even emerge in what was a hundreds and hundreds of years institutionalized environment. And I think we've sort of bucked a lot of those trends. And you always start off scrappy with these things, but certainly as we've become bigger and more relevant, and certainly since I've been here in the last 5 years, it's been about building relationships with all of our constituents. The thing that, I've learned through dealing with financial services is you're not going to get perfection, but you have to be able to leverage relationships when things don't go right. And you're going to need to leverage relationships to get things done. And what do I mean by that? I think the crisis actually has been a really interesting time for innovation, certainly in my world. We were part of the PPP program, which was giving, small businesses or businesses access to government funding through the SBA program. We were not an SBA lender. Most, financial services companies will spend years and years and years developing the framework to be an SBA lender. Our teams did it in about 3 weeks, working with the US Treasury. And I think that would have been impossible. And I still think we ourselves sometimes to think that that's actually been possible in that time frame. And I think that was in part because we've built very, very credible relationships with the US Treasury Department, but also all of the adjacent organizations, whether it's OFAC, whether it's law enforcement. And I think those are those moments where you can actually, really look back and sort of say, that's what it takes to move that needle into white space. And we've seen it again, most recently at a state level with our crypto license. We just announced a couple of weeks ago that we're putting crypto into our wallets. And that requires, it has been, as I'm sure many of you know, a very hotly debated topic. It goes to the heart of state sovereignty and national sovereignty for a lot of countries. And we sort of very intentionally worked with the regulator, our prudential regulator, which is the New York DFS, to get a preliminary from them. I think that's all to do with the years and years of investment we've made with those regulators. And I think it all comes back to those relationships, that openness and that transparency.
I've definitely heard that from others that those relationships are key, and it's always something I think maybe overlooked when you think about regulatory challenges, how important those relationships are. So that's great. We heard from our audience that AI is an important part of an organization today. It's either already in use. I think our respondents said it's either already in use or they're getting going on it now. Erin, how would you say that VIA's approach to data and AI has evolved over time?
So as people are living more and more of their lives online, I think they're thinking critically about how to use all of these new digital tools, and especially as people shift towards e-commerce almost entirely, I think people are thinking more about how their data will be used and what expectations they have specifically around their privacy. So for us, in terms of the data that we keep, we have had to do a couple of things. We've had to maintain our current levels of privacy compliance, and that means staying abreast of developments in GDPR and CCPA compliance. But also, as we've developed new products, we've had to think about new data privacy regimes. So, we offer a product for school buses and for school children, and so we've had to think about student privacy and navigate the landscape of COPPA, SEPA, FERPA, sort of an alphabet soup of children's privacy regulations and student privacy regulations, and then also offering paratransit services and non-emergency medical services, thinking about having people's PHI medical data and becoming HIPAA compliant. That has been another process that we've undergone. And then, as we've grown into a larger company and thinking about entering the public sphere, embarking upon ISO certification to more formalize our policies around data control. And so all of these things have required a lot of internal and leveraging external resources on privacy and data security. In terms of AI, we're very excited about the promise of AI and its potential. We do leverage AI in terms of predictive analytics, predicting demand. Where people will need rides and where people will want to go in order to pre-position vehicles in the most efficient way. And we're also leveraging the power of telematics, which has tremendous potential to improve road safety and also lead to better insurance outcomes. When insurers have better data, they can more accurately quote our insurance premiums. So we're really excited about the power of AI, but I think we also spend a decent amount of time, at least at the executive level, thinking about the ethics behind AI and thinking about, when systems make decisions without human intervention, they might lead to suboptimal results. And so we think about, adding that human analytical layer to evaluate whether the logic that's pre-programmed into those systems is subject to any kind of implicit bias, and how we as humans can bring an ethical overlay to those AI systems so that they make decisions that reflect our values.
That's a constant challenge and a great point. I'm sure also with respect to the privacy regulations that you referenced, you run into all kinds of challenges, since those were often drafted during a time that looked very different from today's markets and innovation and technology. So that's a constant it's a constant struggle. Beth, I'm sure that you run across similar issues. How do you think Open Doors approach to data and AI has evolved over time?
Sorry, the dreaded mute button. I think it's interesting because if you think about our core business, which is buying and selling houses, we don't actually care about the data of the individual. That transaction is, at the end of the day, mostly a public transaction. The fact that you bought or sold your house is a matter of public record. But what we care about is the data about the house. How many bedrooms? Does it have a finished or unfinished basement? What's the square footage of the lot? Is it on a primary, secondary, tertiary street? So when we think about data from that perspective, it's all about the house and the information about your house and all the houses around you, so that we can properly use AI to price the house. Now, there's probably embedded systemic racism that runs through the way that real estate has priced homes in the past. And we think about that and we're conscious about that when we look at how are we pricing the house and thinking about the neighborhood characteristics of that. Then there's a second piece that you have to think about when you have a mortgage and title and escrow business, because then you're in true fintech land. And you are really thinking about protecting someone's financial information, their FICO, credit information, et cetera. Payments is going to be their bank account information. So, that's a very different analysis that we do, and making sure that the two data pools don't touch each other, right? So folks at our company that are doing real estate information should never, ever, ever have your personal data that the mortgage business has. So being very intentional and building a deep partnership with the engineering team is critical to be successful on that front, particularly as a fast-growing startup. So those are things that we think a lot about, and my team in particular partners very closely with senior leadership in our engineering team to provide training, information, and to build programs together instead of letting one or both of the teams build programs in silos.
That makes a lot of sense. That's really interesting. Louise, are you seeing similar things at PayPal, similar evolution in terms of how the company is thinking about data, or do you feel like you've been fairly consistent since, I think your technology has remained somewhat stable through this economy?
Yeah, look, we've been, I think we've been in AI for many, many years. So this is not kind of quote unquote new phenomena for us, but it's a very fast moving environment. And I think one of the things, all companies should be thinking about when getting into AI is, it's often too late to fix it once it's been created, because, it's actually, by its definition, it's machine learning, it's self-learning, right? And so one of the things that we've been very focused on is actually building great diversity in our workforce so that you're not sort of creating these, what, Erin was referring to, these inherent biases, which are actually quite hard to unravel once they're in the machine learning. And I think that's a very important element that I think sometimes does get overlooked when people are sort of, over rotating to how and when data is used versus how and when was data created to begin with, and what are you using it for? And so we've been very focused, I think, on the ethical management. And I think part of that goes to, what's your commitment to your end user? And ours is really about trust. We want you to trust us. So what do we use your data for in an AI environment? Well, we believe in, with financial services, we're not all kind of homogeneous, right? We all have different life experiences. We all have different backgrounds. And if the data is not dynamic, then we will get a homogeneous output. And so if we can use that technology as a source for good, then I can use that to do sort of predictions on, well, Michelle, you travel to these 3 places 3 times a year. The data can tell me that that's not a fraud issue when they see you going into those places. And that's the sort of benefits that come with that. But you've got to have invested very heavily upfront with the technology and the people who are creating it, to both have a very, I think, empathetic view of the world and the world around us and the type of people that we are as humans, and the geographical and cultural sensitivities, as well as what we would classically describe as bias.
I think, Michelle, if I can piggyback on something that Louise said that I think is really interesting in the area of fintech and doesn't necessarily impact Open Door, but did at my previous company, it's the use of FICO. FICO has quite a bit of historical issues with it that lead to not really being a good measure of whether or not someone can repay their loan or not. And so that with all of the data that we can collect about someone, or whether a business or a consumer's spending habits and their ability to repay, we can almost do free cash flow analysis on individuals, and we don't have to rely on FICO. And so I think that's one of the really powerful elements where we can overcome these, historic things that we all know are flawed for the benefit of individuals and consumers without actually hurting our core business and having people actually repay the loans that they get. So I think that's what's really exciting about some of the data opportunities that we have.
That's a great point. Yeah. So you 3 are in very distinct industries, and I'd love to hear what you think and kind of what you've observed as your customers' primary concerns when it comes to digital transactions. And Erin, we can start with you if you'd like. I know that these are very distinct areas. I'm sure you'll have interesting responses.
Yeah, I think Louise made a really great point in the last answer in talking about, having a diverse workforce and having the diversity of viewpoints influence what goes into the AI systems. And that is something that we think about a lot when we think about, what is driving our customers' interest in digital transactions, and what are they looking for? And what are they concerned about as well? And so for us, one of the things that we are really looking at is trying to figure out how to create a holistic measure of access to mobility, access to transportation. And this is something that is very important to us in our ESG work as well, thinking about, what is our overall impact on the environment and on sustainability. And so for us, if we can holistically measure access to transportation, then we can begin to think about, how does having access to on-demand mobility improve a person's life by increasing their access to jobs and hospitals and schools, and how does that increase their health outcomes and their economic outcomes? And because our customers are often public sector entities and municipalities, these concerns are really at the forefront of their goals in terms of trying to provide a public service to their constituents. And so for us, it's very important that we understand what they're thinking about and that we speak their language. So we're looking at a lot of issues in terms of connecting with payment systems and how to provide on-demand mobility for the unbanked, for people who don't have access to bank accounts or credit cards, or people who receive public benefits. How can they use their public transit benefits, or people who receive a transit subsidy from their work? How can they seamlessly tie those funds to pay for on-demand shared rides? And then also, we've really innovated quite a bit in the space of multimodal journeys. So that's really, I think, the holy grail of on-demand transit is for an end user to be able to quickly and easily visualize the different modes of transit that are available to them in a single trip. So whether they could take the bus, the train, the subway, a scooter, or an on-demand shared via, and then they can optimize that for travel time, carbon footprint, reliability, comfort, above ground access to Wi-Fi, whatever is important to them. And then they can make a single payment for their entire journey, even if it involves, say, a first or last mile solution in a via or on a scooter to take them to public transit. So that's something that we've increasingly innovated in that space, and that's really driven by our customers' demand and increasing granularity into how we use their data.
So it sounds like a lot of the innovation you described there is very much responding to that customer demand. Louise, what do you think your customers are primarily concerned with when it comes to digital transactions, which is your core business?
Yeah, I mean, I think there isn't one sort of single issue. I think it's sort of we operate globally, and I think it is different depending on where you go. So I think not to get into sort of geopolitical issues, but you certainly see data storage is becoming an issue from a nationalized element as well. Where's data stored and how is data used? I think we also see from customers I think the craving, especially given what we've gone through in 2020 around finding solutions for their business needs, and in fact arguably anticipating that, because I think people have felt especially small business owners have really felt the squeeze this year. And it's really hard when you're stressed to find innovation. I mean, it's a psychological, well-known issue that it's, when you're stressed, you're not at your most innovative. And I think companies, I think like ours, have a responsibility to actually be, preempting what are those needs. And one of those needs was very simple. Businesses wanted to get back and open. And either governments were concerned about that, or customers were concerned. So how do you create safe environments? And that was where the sort of exploration of the QR codes for us really emerged, because we saw that very dire need to support those customers. So I think the concerns actually bridge many dimensions when you look at your customer segment, and you look at it from a sort of a geographical perspective. So I think, I think it really is about knowing who your customers are, what do they want, what do they need, and I think it's really about sort of and anticipating what they need, and really being proactive about that. And and not feeling overly constrained with, you know, the external environment, and figuring out creative ways how to navigate through that.
That makes a lot of sense. On the other end of the spectrum, Beth, I think about Open Door, you know, a company that is working in an industry that has traditionally not been digital at all, and you guys coming in and introducing this novel way of conducting these transactions. What do you think is top of mind for your consumers when it comes to digital transactions?
Yeah, for us, it's trust. You know, you're interacting with us to buy or sell your largest asset. And that's intimidating and scary. And in particular, because the real estate transaction is so opaque, right? You know, even though you're getting a state sanctioned contract, you know, it's 40 pages long, full of a bunch of crap nobody understands. Even the lawyers, like, I read it, I'm like, what is this? So it's trust, like, you know, and not a huge chunk of our customers are not digital natives. You know, my parents sold their house to Open Door, believe it or not. And so we have to meet people where they are, and we have to explain what we do, and we have to be open and transparent about what the process is, because that is what builds trust with our customers. Despite the fact that we're in 24 markets and have sold, you know, billions of dollars, bought and sold billions of dollars of real estate, there still is an element where people ask us, wait, is this for real? Are you a real company? Is this too good to be true? So we spend a lot of time with our customers on that. And I don't think that will go away. I think that will always be a huge component of our relationship with our customers, whether we're digital or not.
Right. Yep. No, I think that's right. That's exactly right. I'm going to shift a little bit to collaboration. I think, Erin, you mentioned, Beth, you mentioned some of the ways that you all collaborate. I was going to ask, you know, Erin, how is VIA collaborating with partners to address some of these challenges, you know, different hurdles that you run across?
For sure. So I think the internal and the external collaboration pieces are both extremely important. And before I worked at VIA, I worked at a bank. And I remember I used to overhear the traders referring to the legal and compliance team as the Department of Revenue Prevention. And so when I came to VIA, I swore that I was never going to be in charge of a Department of Revenue Prevention again. And if I got to build my own legal team, that I would build it in a way, you know, where it was a real true partner to the business. So for me, you know, it's about trying to honor the visionary thinkers that we have on our team, and the way that they really try to stay ahead of the curve with their new ideas that are sometimes out of the box and sometimes, you know, a bit scary if they haven't been done before, and try to help them think about, you know, how can we do this in a compliant way, and, you know, not to stifle them, but to be very clear-headed and very specific about the risks we might face and identify litigation, regulatory, IP risks. And I work with a lot of people who are quantitative thinkers and, you know, who have a natural inclination towards data. So I try to take that into account and think about providing them with some quantitative analysis and some examples to support my analytical thinking, and not just sort of qualitative opinions and advice. And it's important also for us to educate our salespeople so that they understand, you know, what are the key terms in the contracts, and when they feel empowered and informed to negotiate those contracts, and they don't just glaze over the key contractual provisions, that can actually help them meet their sales goals and enable us to close deals faster. And I think it's also really important for us to have, you know, we're very lucky in that we have a business team and the executive team, all who are aligned in having a very strong moral compass, and are aligned around having a low tolerance for taking reputational risks in this market. And that's something that we try to clearly communicate to our partners, and many of them are public sector entities who are a bit more risk averse. And so that, like, authenticity and that exercise in trust building tends to go a long way.
Right, that makes sense. Louise, I'm sure that you also have similar experiences working with partners. What are some of the different ways that PayPal collaborates with partners taking on these challenges?
Yeah, look, I think we have lots of partnerships, and, you know, and that sort of runs the gamut for us between sort of, you know, what you consider traditional partnership to, you know, investments, and sort of, you know, significant investments. And I think, you know, we do a lot of diligence and a lot of thought up front. I think as a team that tends to evaluate those opportunities, we really try to not rush in And that doesn't mean we take time, but I think we really try to make sure that we understand what each of us is looking for, and that we have the, you know, a very open and courageous dialogue around what do we see, what fits, what doesn't fit, so that we try to head off, I think, a lot of the things that get overlooked in partnering relationships down the line, which can often end up in litigation. And so, you know, I think for us, I think we are really trying to sort of create an environment for both our employees to not just dissent, but to actually dissent with thoughtful insight. And at the same time, we're trying to create an environment where people feel very empowered. And for those two to coexist in a culture, you have to have a tolerance for failing, and you have to have a tolerance for people not necessarily getting it right every minute, every day, and sort of calibrating every time you do something, what went well, what didn't go well. And so we do a lot of that inside PayPal on a regular basis. I think if you don't, you stifle, and people get paralyzed with fear. And I think it really does come down to the cultural elements of your company, because what you can't control is the cultural elements of the other company. And I think that's where you start to understand, if you are clear on who you are, does that match, does that work with what you're trying to create? And I think the clarity in that becomes much clearer than I think the sort of sales pitch that you often hear and see, which some people can run away with. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I was curious, Beth, if in the real estate world, if you deal with different challenges in your partnerships, where you're dealing with perhaps partners who are not involved in digital transactions. It's just a natural part of real estate. I imagine you interface with a lot of organizations, entities, regulatory bodies that are not quite moving at the same speed, and in the digital world. And how do you handle those types of partnerships and challenges?
Yeah, so we have a number of partnerships with home builders, REITs, and other institutional buyers of homes, as well as other real estate brokerages. You know, when a customer comes to us, they may want to work with a realtor rather than working directly with us, and we support that. And we have a number of partnerships with those realtors. We want to meet people where they are. I think that's true both of our employee base and our customer base. We want to deliver what they need. And so what that means for partnerships, our experience is most people are really excited. They're really excited that, if we're selling a house, we're not emotionally attached to the house. We're not going to think it's worth $1 million because little Johnny's growth chart is on the door, right? And so for a lot of realtors, not all, that is really powerful, and it makes their job easier when they're trying to negotiate a great deal on behalf of their client who's purchasing a house from us. So in a lot of ways, the technology incentives, the clarity of experience, the transparency is great for our realtor partners. And the same for our home builders and for our REIT partners. They really like what we bring to the table. They like that they can work with us easily to sell or purchase homes, and the technology that we've built to enable that process. So that's actually a relatively easy thing. I think on the internal front, one of the things that my team has done is I don't really take the view that internal partners are my client. I know some folks do that. I don't. We're partners. We work for the same company. We're rowing the boat in the same direction. And I care just as much about successful business outcomes as the folks in my company do. So how do we align? How do we be creative? How do we come to the table with solutions instead of, no, you can't do that? And that's all about understanding someone's goals. What are you trying to achieve? What are the things that are important to you, and what are the things that aren't so important? Because it may be that the unimportant thing is what's sticking you, and I can unstick this if you tell me you don't care about that, right? And I think this is particularly true in Silicon Valley, where you might be working with, a more junior product person, or a product person who doesn't come from a fintech or a real estate background. And, they just want to do what they want to do, which is great. It's creative, it's innovative, et cetera. And we have to build good partnerships. I think a classic example is referrals. In real estate, you can't actually refer someone. That is not allowed under RESPA, and you also inadvertently create our customers to, or cause our customers to do unlicensed real estate. So those give 10, get 10 referral codes that everybody in Silicon Valley loves just don't work at Open Door. So there's a lot of training and education to help people understand that, and then work through them. Like, what are you actually trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? We have solutions here. Let's talk about it. So again, it's funny, the theme I've heard through this whole session is, while technology is enabling everything, it's still about the relationship. I think Louise hit this really hard. It's about building and developing openness and collaboration and trust, so that you can take what are amazing technology gains to their full potential.
That's right. I'm hearing that same theme. Absolutely. I heard in the beginning from the audience that privacy is a critical element of their kind of day-to-day operations. And I'm curious how each of you are handling, you want to, maintain that trust with your consumers, your customer base, and therefore you have to keep up with these constantly evolving privacy and data security regulations. How do you handle that, and what has been your approach within your legal department? We can start with you, Erin, if that's helpful.
Sure, no problem. So I'd say it's a combination of having the right experience on my in-house team, and then also leveraging our relationships with outside counsel all around the world. We're now a global business. We have 180 plus deployments in 23 different countries. So it's very important for us to have the right outside counsel in all the jurisdictions where we operate, because we can't possibly stay on top of every privacy law, just with our in-house team. And it's really important for us to have a network of trusted experts that we can work with. But internally, we have our legal team, and then we have our risk team, which is sort of an interdisciplinary team, and then the info security team. And we work very closely and collaboratively on looking at all the different emerging data privacy risks, cybersecurity threats, and using technology to the best of our ability. So using new tools for threat assessment, early detection, fraud prevention technology, and leveraging the different tools that we think can help keep our end users safe. And then always trying to look at new developments in law and think critically about, what does this mean, this change in the legal landscape? For example, Privacy Shield was recently invalidated, and now, with the Schrems decision, does it still make sense to renew your Privacy Shield certification, or should you just rely on the contractual clauses? And what does this mean for all the DPAs that are being negotiated every day? So these are issues that we try to kind of come up with a high-level position on and have some clarity around. And then once we make a decision, we can kind of filter that down through every different layer of the organization, so that people don't feel paralyzed by the lack of information or the uncertainty in the regulatory environment, and can continue doing business.
That sounds right. I know one of the common themes that I hear from clients is that it's so important to train across the company on these issues, so that people within their various spaces know when to bring in that expert, whether it's an internal resource or outside counsel, because everything, innovation is all happening so fast that it's hard for the legal department to keep an eye on every single thing. So you need to train your engineers to know what types of things might result in needing an IP or privacy data security expert to be side. Louise, are you dealing with the same thing? How do you all handle the constantly evolving privacy and data security systems?
Yeah, look, it's a constant. I mean, we obviously have great, because we're financial services, we actually kind of created privacy as part of our broader compliance framework, right? I think typically people will sort of keep privacy within the confines of just the legal department, and it becomes a compliance issue. For me, privacy is really the most effective when it's in the hearts and minds of the person who's sitting and coding at the keyboard. And if they understand, can I collect somebody's telephone number or can I not at the beginning, then actually, then it becomes a game changer, right? Because legal departments are then only, scrambling at the end of the process. And I think there's sort of, people have talked about for probably close to a decade now, sort of, privacy by design, but actually it's much more inherent in that. To me, it's privacy, taken responsibly by every single employee in the company. So I don't see this as just being a kind of quote unquote legal issue. I think we will help establish the different rules and regulations through a combination of partnerships, databases. If you're a coder on a product, what your regulatory framework is that you have to adhere to, and we keep those sorts of things updated. That's obviously a very important, somewhat more perfunctory element, and we partner with law firms or with expert organizations. But to me, it's much more the essence of, do I, as an employee of PayPal, feel a sense of responsibility? And I think it's building that into your culture is probably the most effective element, I think, for privacy.
That sounds right. And we are, I have just a few more minutes left, so I'll leave you all with one more question. And as we close out here, when you think about the future, you look ahead, what are some of the key challenges that you foresee your organization or your industry facing? And what have been your organization's keys to success in this COVID-19 environment? So Beth, I'll start with you.
I'll take the latter first. I think the key success has been pivoting quickly and moving mountains to roll out what customers need in light and taking advantage of opportunities. I think probably many know that we are going public through a SPAC transaction. That was an opportunity that arose and we seized it. Just like with the COVID pandemic hitting in March, we seized the opportunity to do virtual assessments, something that we've been wanting to do and roll out for some time. So I think that will continue to be one of our strengths, is our ability to see the opportunity and to see where we can apply technology to achieve those goals and to make it easier to buy and sell real estate for many Americans. In terms of what a challenge might be, that's tough. Where does one start, right? Particularly in a fast-growing startup. But it's always about what new products can make customers' lives better and empower them with the freedom to move. What are the things that we can do as you think about all the things that you need to move? Like, we've only just begun, buy or sell your house, get a mortgage, do title and escrow, but what else is there, right? Maybe you want to list it. So we've launched a new product called List with Opendoor, or Sell with Opendoor, depending on what side of the transaction you're on. So the sky's the limit from my perspective, and it's just going to be about building, I think, what this whole panel has been talking about: trusted relationships with our partners, trusted relationships with the regulators, and then trusted relations within legal and the business teams that are trying to achieve these goals. That's the challenge. How do you foster that and not accidentally break it as you're really racing to build these new products on what I think is going to continue to be an accelerated timeline?
Thanks, Beth. Erin, what about you at VIA? What do you see down the road?
Yeah, so we face a lot of uncertainty in terms of people's changing patterns of mobility, how people decide to move around, especially in COVID and hopefully soon a post-COVID environment, and also the future of the gig economy and the future of work, how people will work in the sharing economy. And in light of that environment, we think it's really important to maintain flexibility, to be flexible with our products and have them work in a variety of different modalities, and then to be able to see around corners a little bit. And think about, what is next? What do people need? And be very plugged into the mindset of our end users and what kind of services would make sense for both riders and also for drivers in an on-demand shared ride economy. And so for us, we think that we were very well positioned to respond to customers' evolving needs in COVID because we had already been, affecting a transition to a software-based platform. And with public procurement, the sales cycles are very long. You know, it took years to apply through RFPs for some of these public procurements and build relationships with public sector partners, but we had already been in that process by the time COVID transformed the landscape. So we were very well positioned to innovate on those products. In terms of the future going forward, I think incorporating electric vehicles onto our platform and increasing the percentage of electric vehicles that we use will help us turbocharge our ability to reduce carbon emissions and meet some of our ESG goals, and also the increasing use of autonomous vehicles and thinking about how that transforms the landscape for shared rides. And then finally, iterating on our multimodal solutions to make travel more seamless in a post-COVID world. And I think all those things taken together will help us build back trust among consumers in the safety of public transit systems.
Thanks, Erin. And Louise, I'll leave it with you for your final response. There was also a question from the audience, if you'd like to address it, just regarding PayPal, the driver for PayPal's support of cryptocurrency. If you'd like to touch on that as well, you're welcome to.
Yes, I know we've only got 1 minute left. So look, my fellow panelists, I think, hit some very good responses to your question. I think, you know, the additional element I would add to that is, you know, I think about this, and of course I wear a HR hat as well as a legal hat, you know, from, you know, how do we enable really energized employees in this environment, right? We are working from home, which is a blessing, but it's also a curse. And how do you keep that energy, collaboration mindset, and that balance? And I think for companies in the future, that's going to be I would say, unifying challenge, as we are sort of, you know, all somewhat hesitant to go back into an office environment. And I think that's going to take time. And I think the companies who can really manage that by putting their employees first, giving them the psychological safety, the job security, the certainty, I think will I think become a differentiator in the future. So I just sort of put that out there as sort of an additional dimension to the ones that were the excellent points that were raised. And I think just to answer the question on crypto, you know, crypto is a currency, and there's many forms of cryptocurrency, and you know, it's here to stay. And you know, people want choice, and we believe as PayPal in giving customers choice. And so bringing crypto into our wallet, and working with our merchants, you know, of which we have, you know, many millions, to sort of support them and help them with the volatility that often comes with different types of crypto, I think feel very important for us as a company, as a sort of strategic evolution. So hopefully that answers the question. Thank you. I think you're on mute, Michelle.
That's better. Thank you, Louise. And Erin and Beth, that wraps up today's program. And on behalf of Mayor Brown and our guest panelists, thank you for your time. I hope you found this program useful. Thank you for participating.